The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Sarah Martinez carefully disassembled the Barrett M82 sniper rifle on the metal table. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, each component removed and placed in its designated spot with military efficiency. The weapon cleaning station buzzed with activity around her, but Sarah remained focused on her task, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. Sarah had been part of the support team for 3 years now, maintaining weapons and equipment for the elite units that rotated through the base. At 26, she had already earned respect among her peers for her meticulous attention to detail and encyclopedic knowledge of firearms. What most people didn't know was that Sarah's expertise came from years of hunting with her grandfather in the Montana wilderness, where she had first learned to shoot at the age of 8. The cleaning bay fell unusually quiet as Commander Jake Morrison entered the facility. Morrison was a legend among Navy SEALs, with over 15 years of combat experience and countless successful missions under his belt. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and junior personnel often found themselves tongue-tied in his presence. Sarah, however, was too engrossed in her work to notice the sudden change in atmosphere. Morrison had come to inspect the weapons maintenance protocols, a routine procedure that he conducted quarterly to ensure his team's equipment met the highest standards. He moved methodically through the facility, observing the technicians at work and occasionally asking questions about procedures and timelines. His trained eye caught every detail, from the organization of the cleaning supplies to the precision with which each weapon was handled. When Morrison reached Sarah's station, he paused. The young woman worked with an unusual level of concentration, her movements deliberate and confident. She had stripped the rifle down to its core components and was carefully cleaning each piece with specialized solvents. What caught Morrison's attention wasn't just her technique, which was flawless, but the way she handled the weapon itself. There was a familiarity there that went beyond standard maintenance training. Sarah finally looked up when she sensed someone watching her. She found herself face to face with Commander Morrison, his intense blue eyes studying her with curiosity, rather than the typical military scrutiny she was accustomed to. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Morrison's gaze shifted to the partially reassembled rifle in her hands. "How long have you been working with long-range weapons?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of command. Sarah straightened slightly, recognizing the rank insignia on his uniform, though she maintained her composure better than most junior personnel did when confronted by the legendary SEAL commander. 3 years in maintenance, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "But I've been shooting since I was 8. She gestured toward the rifle components laid out on the table. "My grandfather taught me on a Remington 700 in Montana. Said if you're going to use a tool, you better understand every part of it." Morrison nodded approvingly. There was something about Sarah's demeanor that set her apart from the typical support staff. She wasn't intimidated by his presence, and her answer suggested a deeper understanding of marksmanship than her current role would require. "What's your experience with precision shooting?" he asked, genuinely curious now. Sarah paused in her cleaning routine. She had never discussed her shooting background with anyone at the base, preferring to keep her personal skills separate from her professional duties. "I've done some competitive shooting, sir. Local competitions back home mostly." She didn't mention the state championships she had won, or the fact that she regularly outshot hunters and military veterans twice her age. The conversation was interrupted by Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, Morrison's logistics coordinator, who approached with a tablet full of maintenance reports. "Commander, we need to discuss the ammunition inventory for next week's training exercises," Rodriguez said, then paused when he noticed the intensity of Morrison's focus on Sarah's workstation. "Give me a minute, Rodriguez," Morrison said without taking his eyes off Sarah. He watched as she began reassembling the Barrett with smooth, efficient movements. Her fingers found each component instinctively, never fumbling or hesitating. The muscle memory was clearly there, built through years of practice that went far beyond basic maintenance training. As Sarah worked, she found herself stealing glances at the commander. His reputation was well known throughout the base, and she had heard countless stories about his tactical brilliance and leadership under fire. What she hadn't expected was his genuine interest in her work. Most officers passed through the maintenance bay without giving the support staff a second thought, but Morrison seemed genuinely engaged in understanding her background and capabilities. "The Barrett's a beautiful piece of engineering," Sarah said as she fitted the bolt assembly back into place. "Effective range of nearly 2,000 meters in the right hands. Though I've always preferred the consistency of the Remington 700 platform for precision work." She paused, realizing she might be speaking too casually to a senior officer. "Sir," she added quickly. Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly. It wasn't often that support personnel offered technical opinions about weapon systems, especially with such confidence. "You have experience with both platforms?" he asked, his interest clearly piqued. Sarah nodded, finishing the reassembly process. The rifle now sat complete on the table, every component perfectly aligned and secured. "Yes, sir. Different tools for different jobs. The Barrett's got the power for extreme long-range work, but the 700's got the accuracy for precision shots where you only get one chance." She ran her hand along the rifle's stock, her touch revealing a familiarity that spoke of extensive hands-on experience. The conversation was creating quite a stir in the maintenance bay. Other technicians had begun to take notice of the extended discussion between the legendary SEAL commander and one of their colleagues. Whispered conversations started up at nearby workstations, as personnel wondered what had captured Morrison's attention so completely. Morrison found himself increasingly intrigued by this young woman, who spoke about precision rifles with the confidence of a seasoned marksman while working as a maintenance technician. There was clearly more to Sarah Martinez than her personnel file indicated, and his instincts told him that her skills might be exactly what his team needed for an upcoming mission that required unprecedented precision and reliability. The foundation was set for a revelation that would change both their lives forever. Commander Morrison couldn't shake his conversation with Sarah Martinez from his mind as he made his way to the base's firing range later that afternoon. Her casual expertise with the Barrett rifle and confident discussion of different precision platforms had sparked something in his tactical mind. He had spent enough time around shooters to recognize the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical experience, and Sarah clearly possessed the latter. The SEAL team was facing a unique challenge. Intelligence had identified a high-value target who would be attending a meeting in a remote mountainous region, but the only viable shooting position was at an extreme distance that pushed the boundaries of conventional sniper capabilities. Morrison's best marksmen were exceptional, but this mission required something beyond exceptional. It required perfection at a range that few people in the world had ever successfully engaged. As Morrison reached the range, he found his team conducting their standard marksmanship training. Staff Sergeant Kevin Chen, his primary sniper, was working with the Barrett M82 at a 1,000-meter target. Chen was arguably one of the best shots in the Navy, with confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 800 meters. But even Chen's exceptional skills might not be sufficient for what intelligence was asking them to attempt. Morrison watched Chen fire a 5-shot group that could be covered by a silver dollar at 1,000 meters, impressive by any standard. But the mission they were facing would require precision at more than 3 times that distance, in conditions that would test every aspect of a shooter's skill and equipment. The margin for error would be essentially zero. "How are you feeling about extreme long-range work?" Morrison asked Chen as the staff sergeant cleared his weapon and marked his target scores. Chen looked up, recognizing the tone that suggested his commander was working through a tactical problem. "Confident to 2,000 meters in good conditions, sir," Chen replied honestly. "Beyond that, it becomes more art than science. Wind calls get exponentially harder, and even small equipment variations can throw shots off target." He paused, studying Morrison's expression. "Are we looking at something beyond 2,000? Morrison nodded grimly. "Potentially much beyond." He didn't elaborate on the specific distance, but Chen's experience told him they were discussing something at the extreme edge of possible. The physics of long-range shooting became increasingly unforgiving as distances increased, with factors like Earth rotation and atmospheric conditions playing significant roles in bullet trajectory. Meanwhile, Sarah had finished her shift and was preparing to leave the base when she decided to make a detour to the range. She often came here after hours to maintain her skills, though she typically waited until the facility was empty to avoid drawing attention. Today, however, she arrived to find Morrison's SEAL team still conducting training exercises. Sarah positioned herself in the observation area, watching the training session with professional interest. She could see immediately that these were exceptional shooters, their fundamentals solid and their equipment top-notch. Staff Sergeant Chen, in particular, demonstrated the kind of consistent precision that separated elite military marksmen from recreational shooters. But as Sarah watched, her trained eye began to pick up subtle details that others might miss. Chen's shooting position, while textbook correct, could be optimized for extended sessions at extreme range. His breathing pattern was efficient for standard distances, but Sarah knew from experience that ultra-long-range shooting required different timing. Small adjustments that might seem insignificant at normal ranges could make the difference between success and failure when pushing the absolute limits of ballistic performance. Morrison noticed Sarah's arrival and found himself walking over to where she stood observing the training. "Off duty?" he asked, settling beside her to watch his team's practice session. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off the shooters. "Just wanted to see how the equipment I maintain performs in action." It wasn't entirely true. Sarah was genuinely curious about the skill level of the base's elite units, having heard stories about their capabilities for years. They watched in comfortable silence for several minutes as Chen worked through various shooting positions and distances. Morrison found himself studying Sarah's reactions to the training, noting how her focus lingered on technical details that most observers would overlook. When Chen made a particularly challenging shot, Sarah nodded approvingly, but her expression suggested she was analyzing the technique rather than simply being impressed by the result. "What do you think of the shooting?" Morrison asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. Sarah hesitated for a moment, aware that offering unsolicited technical opinions to a SEAL commander might be overstepping her bounds as support personnel. "Your staff sergeant is excellent," she said carefully. "Solid fundamentals, good equipment handling, consistent results. For standard military applications, he's as good as it gets." She paused, then added, "Though there are some things that might help if you're planning to push extreme distances." Morrison's attention sharpened immediately. "Such as?" Sarah gestured toward Chen's position. "His shooting stance is optimized for mobility and standard engagement ranges, but for shots beyond 2,000 meters, you want maximum stability and consistency. Small adjustments to position, breathing rhythm, trigger technique, they become magnified at extreme distance," she continued, warming to the subject despite her initial reluctance. "Environmental factors become critical too. Most shooters underestimate how much atmospheric pressure changes affect trajectory at ultra-long range. Temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth start playing significant roles." Morrison listened intently, recognizing that Sarah was speaking from experience rather than theory. Her observations were too specific and nuanced to come from textbooks or casual study. "Sounds like you've done some extreme long-range work yourself," he said, making it more statement than question. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, realizing she had revealed more than she intended. "Some," she admitted. "Back home in Montana, there are places where you can take shots that most people never get to attempt. My grandfather had access to private ranch land with valleys that stretched for miles. We used to challenge ourselves to see just how far we could push effective accuracy." The conversation was interrupted by Chen approaching their position. The staff sergeant had noticed the commander's extended discussion with the maintenance technician and was curious about what had captured Morrison's attention so completely. "Commander, are we adjusting the training schedule?" Chen asked, noting the intensity of the ongoing conversation. Morrison introduced Sarah, explaining her role in maintaining the team's weapon systems. Chen nodded politely, though his expression suggested he was wondering why equipment maintenance was the subject of such focused discussion. "Ms. Martinez was just offering some insights about extreme long-range shooting," Morrison explained. "She has some interesting perspectives on optimizing technique for distances beyond our normal training parameters." Chen's eyebrows raised slightly. He had spent years perfecting his craft and working with some of the military's best marksmanship instructors. The idea that a maintenance technician might have insights to offer was surprising, though he tried to keep an open mind. "What kind of distances are we talking about?" he asked Sarah directly. Sarah looked between the two men, sensing that her casual comments had somehow taken on greater significance than she had intended. "It depends on conditions and equipment," she said carefully. "But with the right setup and enough practice, effective shots at 3,000 meters or more are possible. Not easy, and not something you'd want to attempt without extensive preparation, but possible." The number hung in the air between them. Chen's longest confirmed kill was at 2,100 meters, achieved under near-perfect conditions with extensive preparation and support. The idea of consistently hitting targets at distances approaching 3,500 meters seemed almost fantastical, yet Sarah had stated it with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had actually done it. Morrison felt the pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in his mind. His team faced a mission requiring unprecedented precision at extreme range, and he had just discovered that one of his support personnel might possess exactly the skills they needed. But he needed to know more about Sarah's actual capabilities before he could consider involving her in operational planning. The next morning brought an unusual request that would change everything. Commander Morrison had spent most of the night reviewing classified mission parameters and thinking about his conversation with Sarah Martinez. By dawn, he had made a decision that would either validate his instincts or prove that he had seriously misjudged the situation. Sarah arrived at the weapons maintenance facility to find a message waiting for her. "Report to Commander Morrison's office at 0800 hours. The summons was unusual enough to draw curious glances from her colleagues, and Sarah spent the walk across base wondering what she might have done wrong. Support personnel rarely had direct contact with senior officers unless there was a problem. Morrison's office reflected the man himself, functional, organized, and bearing the subtle marks of extensive combat experience. Photographs from various deployments lined one wall, while tactical maps and operational charts occupied another. Sarah stood at attention as she entered, uncertain about the purpose of the meeting. "At ease, Martinez," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I want to discuss something with you, and I need complete honesty in your responses." His tone was serious but not threatening, carrying the weight of command but also genuine curiosity. Sarah sat carefully, her mind racing through possible reasons for the meeting. "Yes, sir," she replied, maintaining eye contact despite her nervousness. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment before speaking. "Yesterday you mentioned extreme long-range shooting capabilities. I need to know exactly what kind of experience you have, because lives may depend on accurate information." The gravity in his voice made it clear that this wasn't casual conversation. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had always kept her shooting background private, preferring to let her work performance speak for itself. But something in Morrison's manner suggested that honesty might be more important than modesty. "How specific do you need me to be, sir?" "Very specific," Morrison replied. "Maximum effective range, conditions, equipment, success rates, everything." Sarah took a deep breath, then began to share details she had never discussed with anyone at the base. She explained how her grandfather, a former Army Ranger, had taught her to shoot in the Montana wilderness on his friend's massive cattle ranch. The property stretched across multiple valleys, providing natural shooting lanes that extended for miles in every direction. "We started with standard hunting rifles at normal ranges," Sarah continued, "but Grandpa was obsessed with precision. He said that truly understanding marksmanship meant pushing every limit until you found the boundaries of what was possible." She described years of methodical training, gradually increasing distances while perfecting technique and learning to read environmental conditions. Morrison listened without interruption as Sarah detailed her progression from recreational shooting to serious long-range work. She described custom-built rifles, hand-loaded ammunition, and countless hours spent studying ballistics tables and weather patterns. What emerged was a picture of someone who had approached extreme marksmanship with scientific precision and unwavering dedication. My longest confirmed shot was at 3,250 meters, Sarah said quietly. Took me 6 months of preparation, studying that specific valley, learning the wind patterns at different times of day, mapping every environmental variable I could identify. She paused, meeting Morrison's intense gaze. It wasn't luck, sir. It was the result of everything my grandfather taught me about patience, preparation, and understanding the science behind the shot. The number hit Morrison like a physical blow. 3,250 meters, over 2 miles, represented a shooting achievement that put Sarah among the most capable marksmen in the world. Even more impressive was the methodical approach she described, which suggested not just exceptional skill, but the kind of analytical mindset that military snipers spent years developing. Can you prove it? Morrison asked directly. He had to know whether Sarah's claims represented reality or wishful thinking. The mission his team faced would allow no room for error or exaggeration. Sarah nodded without hesitation. I have documentation, sir. Photos, GPS coordinates, witness statements from other shooters who were present. My grandfather insisted on recording everything for training purposes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. I can show you some of the documentation if you'd like. Morrison examined the photos Sarah showed him, his experienced eye taking in details that validated her claims. The images showed targets at impossible distances, shooting positions that demonstrated professional-level setup, and equipment that represented serious investment in precision shooting. But more convincing than any photo was Sarah's casual familiarity with technical details that only someone with extensive experience would know. Why didn't this show up in your background investigation? Morrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Military recruiters focused on criminal history and security risks, not recreational shooting achievements. Because I never thought it was relevant to maintenance work, Sarah replied honestly. I came here to serve in whatever capacity was needed, not to show off about personal hobbies. My grandfather always taught me that actions matter more than boasts. Morrison stood and walked to his window, looking out at the training ranges where his team conducted daily practice. The mission parameters scrolled through his mind. A high-value target who would only be vulnerable for a brief window, at a distance that challenged conventional sniper doctrine. His best shooters were exceptional, but even they had expressed doubts about the feasibility of the shot. I'm going to ask you to do something that goes far beyond your current duties, Morrison said, turning back to face Sarah. My team has a mission that requires capabilities at the absolute edge of what's possible. Based on what you've told me, you might be the only person on this base who can make the shot we need. Sarah felt the weight of implication settling over her. She had joined the military to serve, but had always assumed that service would involve supporting others rather than direct action. The idea of transitioning from maintenance technician to operational sniper was both terrifying and exhilarating. What would be required of me, sir? She asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was being discussed. Morrison returned to his seat, his expression serious, but also showing a hint of the excitement that came with finding an unexpected solution to a seemingly impossible problem. Complete discretion, intensive preparation, and willingness to take on responsibilities that most people never face. This isn't training or competition. Lives hang in the balance, including your own. He continued, outlining the general parameters of what the mission would involve without revealing classified details. Sarah listened intently, asking occasional technical questions that further demonstrated her understanding of the complexities involved in extreme long-range operations. I need time to think about this, Sarah said finally. It's a much bigger step than I was prepared for when I woke up this morning. Morrison nodded approvingly. Good. Anyone who would say yes immediately isn't thinking clearly about what's involved. He leaned forward, his expression intensifying. But I also need an answer soon. If you're willing to do this, we need to begin preparation immediately. The window for this operation won't stay open indefinitely. Sarah stood, her mind spinning with the implications of Morrison's offer. A few hours ago, she had been a maintenance technician with an unusual hobby. Now she was being asked to join one of the military's most elite units for a mission that would test everything she had ever learned about precision shooting. How long do I have to decide? She asked. "24 hours," Morrison replied. "Meet me at the range tomorrow at 600. If you decide to move forward, we'll begin with a practical demonstration of your capabilities. My team needs to see what you can do before we commit to including you in operational planning." As Sarah left Morrison's office, she knew that her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. The question was whether she had the courage to embrace that change and the skills to justify Morrison's confidence in her abilities. Sarah spent the longest night of her life weighing Morrison's offer. She walked the base perimeter for hours, her mind cycling through every possible outcome and consequence. By Oro 300 she had made her decision. By Oro 600 she was standing at the firing range, her expression resolute as Morrison approached with Staff Sergeant Chen and 2 other SEAL team members. "I'm in," Sarah said simply when Morrison reached her position. "But I have conditions." Morrison raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her directness. "Let's hear them." "First, I want complete honesty about the mission parameters once you're satisfied with my capabilities," Sarah began. "I won't operate blind. Second, if this goes operational, I want proper training integration with your team. I'm not a lone wolf. I understand that successful missions require coordinated effort." Morrison nodded approvingly. Sarah's conditions demonstrated tactical thinking and understanding of team dynamics that went beyond simple marksmanship skills. "Agreed. Now let's see what you can do." The demonstration began at 800 meters, a distance that allowed Sarah to warm up while giving the SEAL team a baseline for her abilities. She had brought her personal rifle, a custom-built precision instrument that reflected years of careful modification and optimization. The weapon looked functional rather than impressive, but Morrison's experienced eye recognized the subtle signs of professional-grade equipment. Sarah's first shot group at 800 meters could have been covered by a quarter. Chen whistled appreciatively despite himself. It was the kind of consistency that took years to develop. But Morrison was more interested in Sarah's process than her results. He watched how she read environmental conditions, adjusted her position for maximum stability, and controlled her breathing in preparation for each shot. "Conditions are ideal for this range," Sarah commented as she cleared her weapon. "Light wind, stable temperature, good visibility. Real-world operations rarely offer such advantages." She looked at Morrison directly. "What range do you want to see?" "Start with 1,500 meters," Morrison replied. "We'll work up from there." The team moved to a different section of the range where longer distance targets had been set up specifically for this demonstration. Sarah took her time setting up for the longer shot, making minute adjustments to her rifle's scope and carefully gauging wind conditions at multiple points along the bullet's projected path. Her shooting position was notably different from what Chen and the others typically used. Sarah had configured herself for maximum stability and consistency, with every point of contact between her body and the rifle optimized for precision rather than mobility. It was clearly a setup designed for one perfect shot rather than rapid engagement. The 1,500-meter shots were equally impressive, with Sarah placing 5 rounds in a pattern that would have been lethal against any human target. But what caught Morrison's attention was her explanation of the environmental factors she was accounting for. Sarah described air density calculations, temperature gradients, and wind drift estimates with the precision of someone who had spent years studying ballistic science. "Atmospheric pressure is dropping," Sarah observed, checking a small weather monitoring device she had brought with her. "That's going to affect trajectory more significantly as we extend range. The bullet will fly slightly higher than standard, calculations predict." Chen found himself drawn into technical discussions about ballistic coefficients and trajectory modeling. Sarah's knowledge was clearly practical rather than theoretical. She had encountered these variables in real shooting situations and learned to compensate for them through experience. 2,200 meters, Morrison announced for the next phase of the demonstration. This was approaching the limit of what his best snipers could achieve consistently, and would provide a real test of Sarah's capabilities. Sarah spent longer preparing. For this shot, taking multiple wind readings and consulting ballistic calculations she had handwritten on a small notebook. Her preparation was methodical and unhurried, reflecting the patience that extreme long-range shooting demanded. Morrison noted that she showed no signs of pressure or nervousness, despite having an audience of elite military marksmen. The first shot at 2,200 meters struck the target center. The second shot enlarged the hole slightly. By the fifth shot, Sarah had demonstrated consistency that impressed even Chen, whose own capabilities at this range were considerable, but less reliable. Environmental conditions are going to change. If we keep extending range, Sarah warned, the afternoon thermals are starting to build, which will create vertical wind currents that are difficult to predict. For shots beyond 2,500 meters, I'd prefer to wait until conditions stabilize. Morrison glanced at his watch. The morning's ideal shooting conditions were indeed beginning to deteriorate as the sun climbed higher and began creating thermal activity. But he had seen enough to know that Sarah's claimed capabilities were legitimate. The question now was whether she could perform under operational pressure rather than controlled demonstration conditions. One more distance, Morrison said. $3,000 meters. But I want you to take the shot cold, no warm-up rounds, no sighters. Just the way it would happen in a real operation. Sarah nodded, understanding that this was the real test. In operational conditions, there would be no opportunity for trial shots or adjustments based on observed results. Everything would depend on correct environmental reading, precise equipment setup, and flawless execution of fundamentals. She spent 20 minutes studying conditions and making calculations. Morrison watched her work through a systematic process that covered every variable he could think of and several he wouldn't have considered. Sarah's preparation was more thorough than anything he had observed from military snipers, reflecting a level of analytical rigor that impressed him. When Sarah finally settled into her shooting position, the range fell completely silent. Even peripheral activities seemed to pause as everyone focused on what was about to happen. The target at 3,000 meters was barely visible to the naked eye, requiring the spotting scopes that Chen and the others were using to observe the impact area. Sarah's breathing slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm. Her finger found the trigger and applied gradual pressure while she focused entirely on sight alignment and environmental awareness. The shot broke cleanly, the rifle recoiling smoothly in her steady grip. "Hit," Chen announced through his spotting scope, his voice carrying a note of amazement. "Center mass. That's a kill shot." Morrison felt a combination of satisfaction and apprehension. Sarah had just demonstrated capabilities that made her invaluable for the mission his team faced, but it also meant that he would be asking someone with no combat experience to take on one of the most challenging assignments in military operations. "Outstanding work," Morrison said as Sarah cleared her weapon and began packing her equipment. "You've proven everything you claimed and more. Now we need to discuss what comes next." Sarah secured her rifle case and turned to face the SEAL team. She could see respect in their expressions now, the kind of professional acknowledgement that had to be earned rather than granted. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "Intensive training begins tomorrow," Morrison replied. "Combat skills, team integration, operational procedures. You've got the shooting skills we need, but sniping in combat involves much more than marksmanship." He paused, studying her expression. "Are you ready for that level of commitment?" Sarah thought about the life she was leaving behind, the routine maintenance duties, the comfortable anonymity of support work, the safety of never being directly involved in life and death decisions. Then she thought about the challenge Morrison was offering and the chance to use her abilities in service of something larger than herself. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "When do we start?" Morrison smiled grimly, recognizing the determination that had driven Sarah to achieve her exceptional shooting skills. "Oro 500 tomorrow. And Martinez?" He paused until she met his eyes. "Welcome to the team." The transformation began before dawn. Sarah's alarm went off at 0430, giving her 30 minutes to prepare for what Morrison had described as the most intensive training period of her life. As she laced up her boots, she realized there was no going back to her comfortable existence as a maintenance technician. She was about to become part of something that would demand everything she had to give. Morrison was waiting at the training facility when Sarah arrived, accompanied by his core team and a stack of classified briefing materials that would reshape her understanding of the mission they faced. "Today you learn why we need your specific capabilities," he said without preamble. The target is a terrorist leader who will be attending a meeting in Afghanistan's mountain region. Intelligence has identified only one viable shooting position. Sarah studied the topographical maps and satellite imagery Morrison spread across the briefing table. The target location was in a valley surrounded by steep terrain, with limited approaches and excellent natural defensive positions. The only feasible shooting position was on a ridgeline that would require a shot exceeding 3,400 meters, further than even Sarah had ever attempted. The environmental challenges are significant, Morrison continued, pointing to elevation data and historical weather patterns. High altitude, unpredictable wind conditions, extreme temperature variations between day and night. You'll be operating at the absolute edge of what's physically possible. Staff Sergeant Chen leaned forward, his expression serious. We've run computer models on this shot using every available ballistic calculator. The math says it's theoretically possible, but the margin for error is essentially zero. Environmental miscalculations of just a few % would result in a complete miss. Sarah absorbed the information carefully, her mind already working through the challenges involved. What's the timeline for the target's appearance? She asked. If conditions aren't optimal, do we have flexibility to wait for better weather? Morrison shook his head grimly. Single opportunity. Intelligence indicates the target will be in position for less than an hour, and atmospheric conditions at that altitude are unpredictable at best. Whatever the weather brings, we take the shot. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of the operation from infiltration to extraction. Sarah learned that she would be part of a 6-person team responsible for establishing a hidden observation post, maintaining surveillance and executing the shot when the opportunity presented itself. The mission timeline was compressed. Less than 3 weeks for preparation and deployment. Your shooting skills got you on this team, Morrison said as the briefing concluded. But surviving the mission requires much more than marksmanship. Chen is going to run you through combat skills training while I handle operational planning. The next 2 weeks pushed Sarah beyond every limit she thought she had. Chen was a demanding instructor who understood that Sarah's life would depend on skills she had never needed as a support technician. She learned urban warfare tactics, close-quarters combat, advanced fieldcraft, and the dozens of small skills that separated professional operators from recreational enthusiasts. The physical conditioning was brutal. Sarah discovered muscles she didn't know she had as Chen put her through training regimens designed to prepare her for operating in mountainous terrain while carrying equipment that weighed more than she did. Her hands became raw from rope work and weapons handling, and her body ached from exercises that simulated the physical demands of the mission. But it was the mental pressure that proved most challenging. Combat simulations forced Sarah to make shooting decisions under conditions that bore no resemblance to the controlled environments where she had developed her skills. Instructors created scenarios involving moving targets, multiple threats, equipment failures, and time pressure that tested every aspect of her training. Shooting paper targets in Montana didn't prepare you for this, Chen observed after a particularly difficult exercise, where Sarah had struggled to maintain accuracy while under simulated enemy fire. Combat shooting is about managing stress, fear, and uncertainty, while still delivering precision when it matters most. Sarah absorbed the criticism without defensiveness, recognizing that Chen's harsh assessments were designed to identify weaknesses before they became fatal flaws. She attacked each training evolution with the same methodical approach that had made her an exceptional long-range shooter, breaking down complex skills into manageable components and practicing until they became instinctive. The marksmanship training took on new dimensions as Morrison's team worked to simulate the conditions Sarah would face in Afghanistan. They found high-altitude locations that replicated the environmental challenges of the target area, forcing Sarah to adjust her techniques for air density and temperature variations she had never encountered. Your Montana training was excellent preparation for precision shooting, Morrison observed during one high-altitude session. But Afghanistan presents challenges that no amount of recreational shooting can simulate. You're going to encounter conditions that push every technique to its breaking point. Sarah's respect for Morrison's team grew daily as she observed their professionalism and dedication. These men had faced life-and-death situations that she could barely imagine, yet they accepted her as an equal partner in the mission planning process. Their confidence in her abilities was both inspiring and terrifying. The helicopter insertion into Afghanistan came under cover of darkness, with Sarah's team fast roping into a landing zone 15 kilometers from their target position. The weight of her equipment pack, combined with the custom rifle system that had been specially configured for this mission, made movement challenging in the rocky terrain. But 3 weeks of intensive training had prepared her body for the physical demands of mountain operations. Morrison led the team through terrain that seemed designed to break both equipment and spirit. Jagged rock formations required careful navigation, while the thin air at high altitude made every step an effort. Sarah found herself drawing on reserves of endurance she hadn't known she possessed, pushing forward despite fatigue that threatened to compromise her performance when the crucial moment arrived. The observation post they established on the ridgeline was a masterpiece of military engineering and camouflage. Chen and the other team members had created a position that was virtually invisible from the target area, while providing Sarah with an optimal shooting platform. Her rifle was mounted on a bipod system that eliminated the smallest tremors, while environmental monitoring equipment provided real-time data on wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. Target area is 3,426 meters, Chen announced through his spotting scope as they confirmed the exact range to the building where intelligence indicated the meeting would take place. Wind is variable but manageable. Temperature is dropping as we approach sunset. Sarah spent hours studying the target area through her rifle scope, memorizing every detail of the terrain and buildings that would frame her shot. The distance was greater than anything she had ever attempted, even during her years of experimental shooting in Montana, but the methodical preparation that had always been her strength now served her in ways that felt almost supernatural. The waiting was the hardest part. Intelligence had provided a window during which the target might appear, but exact timing remained uncertain. Sarah maintained her shooting position for 6 hours, making minor adjustments as environmental conditions changed while fighting the physical and mental fatigue that came with extended periods of absolute concentration. Morrison monitored communications from the command post, receiving updates from surveillance assets that tracked movement in the target area. The tension was palpable as evening approached and the time window began to narrow. If the target didn't appear soon, the mission would have to be aborted and rescheduled for an uncertain future date. Movement in the target building, Morrison announced quietly. Multiple individuals entering the main conference room. Stand by for target identification. Sarah felt her heart rate settle into the controlled rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Her breathing became deeper and more regular, while her finger found the familiar position on her rifle's trigger. Every system in her body aligned for the precision that the next few minutes would demand. Target confirmed, Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of command decisions. Adult male, approximately 6 feet tall, dark clothing, positioned at the window on the building's east side. You have a clear shot. Sarah's scope picture crystallized into perfect clarity. The target stood in profile at a window, his position exactly matching the intelligence briefings they had studied. At 3,426 meters, he appeared as a tiny figure that required maximum magnification to resolve clearly. The shot would demand everything. She had learned about precision marksmanship. Environmental conditions were challenging but manageable. Wind speed was moderate with slight variations that Sarah had been tracking for hours. Temperature had stabilized in the cool evening air, while atmospheric pressure remained steady. Her calculations indicated that the bullet would take nearly 4 seconds to reach the target, an eternity in operational terms. Send it, Morrison commanded, giving Sarah the authorization she needed to take the shot that would define her military career. Sarah's finger applied steady pressure to the trigger, while her mind focused entirely on sight alignment and environmental compensation. The rifle recoiled smoothly in her grip, launching a precisely crafted bullet on a trajectory that would test every aspect of her training and equipment. For 4 seconds that felt like hours. The team watched through spotting scopes as the bullet traced an invisible arc through the mountain air. Wind currents, atmospheric pressure, Temperature gradients and dozens of other variables all influenced the projectile's path toward a target that represented months of intelligence gathering and operational planning. "Hit," Chen announced, his voice carrying amazement despite his professional composure. "Target down, mission successful." Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions as she cleared her weapon and began preparing for extraction. The shot had been technically perfect, representing the culmination of years of training and weeks of intensive preparation, but it also marked her transformation from support personnel to operational sniper, with all the responsibilities and consequences that change entailed. The extraction went smoothly, with Morrison's team moving efficiently to the pickup zone while maintaining security, protocols that had been drilled into them through countless training exercises. Sarah found herself moving with confidence that surprised her, the combat skills Chen had forced her to learn now feeling natural rather than foreign. During the helicopter flight back to base, Morrison settled beside Sarah in the cargo bay. "Outstanding work," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "That shot will be studied in sniper schools for years to come." Sarah nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "What happens now?" she asked, understanding that her life had changed in ways that extended far beyond a single successful mission. Morrison smiled, recognizing the determination that had driven Sarah to achieve her exceptional capabilities. "Now you become exactly what you've proven yourself to be, one of the most capable precision marksmen in military service. Your maintenance days are over." As the helicopter carried them back toward safety, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from cleaning rifles in anonymity to executing one of the most challenging shots in military history. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't known existed, while earning the respect of some of the military's most elite operators. The quiet technician who had caught Morrison's attention while cleaning a sniper rifle had become something she had never imagined possible. Her 3,250-meter training record had been surpassed by operational necessity, proving that the boundaries of human performance were often limited more by imagination than capability. Morrison watched Sarah during the flight home, seeing confidence and professionalism that marked her transformation from support personnel to elite operator. Her unique journey from maintenance technician to precision sniper would become part of military legend, inspiring others to recognize that exceptional capabilities could emerge from the most unexpected places. The mission had succeeded beyond all expectations, but more importantly, it had revealed that true potential often lay hidden beneath conventional roles and assumptions. Sarah Martinez had proven that excellence knew no boundaries when supported by determination, proper training, and the opportunity to serve something greater than oneself.